Okay, so what we'll do is begin with lighting setup. I've got this scene up on Canvas that you can use as a guide for what we're going to do. So for now though, I'm going to delete the lights that are currently in there so we can sort of reset them up again. And I can explain along the way what we're doing. Okay, so by default, it looks lit, but it's a default light, not coming from any specific light. It just enables you to sort of see what you're doing basically. But adding specific lights, then what we need to do is turn off the default light. Now to do that, you press 7 on the keyboard. So you can see the scene turns black. And again, if you want to turn the default light back on, you press 6. So if you toggle 6, the key 6 and 7 key, you can turn the default lights on and off. Okay, so I'll turn it off. So we're in darkness. You need to consider lighting as a process, meaning you have to block out initial sort of lighting for the whole scene and then add more specific lights for more specific areas or characteristics depending on what you want. So you work from the general to the specific or to the particular, because that gives you a better context in which to make sort of decisions about lighting. So to light this, we're going to use some directional lights. If you go to the Create menu, Lights, we have a list of possible lights. So if I go to Directional Lights, you see something happening, but I'll just move the light up and make it a little bit bigger. Now if you look at a directional light, the symbol is some arrows. What that indicates is the way it illuminates the scene. So it doesn't matter where I move my directional light, it has no change on the scene, but when I rotate it, you can see that it has an effect on the scene. So it's the orientation of that light that matters, not that position. So what I'm going to do is get this directional light rotated in a certain direction. So you can see that it's going in the one direction, so all the aspects of the scene from that angle are being illuminated in the direction that's being lit. If you look at the other side, it's black. So ideally you don't want to sort of, even though you might want shadows in your scene, you want to avoid solid blacks. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate that directional light and then rotate it, that duplicate, to face the opposite side. Again, depending on how you orient it, you can sort of see how it's sort of traveling. So from here you can see that now both sides are lit. That means that there's no side that's totally black because it's been illuminated for both sides. But now what you might want to do is make adjustments to the intensity of the light. So you still get one side of the building or the environment in shadow, but not a black shadow. It's still some illumination. So what you need to do, select one of your directional lights, go to the attribute editor, there we go. So you can see for the particular light, you have some parameters. You can see it's got intensity there. So the default value for intensity is 1. So if you make an adjustment, you can see that it has an effect on the illumination of that particular light, whether it's brighter or dimmer. So what I'll do is I'll make that a bit dimmer, maybe 0.5. And the other one, I'll make maybe 0.1. So it's quite dim, the whole scene, but not too, so you can see the bit of that in shadow is not totally black, there's some illumination, because if it was totally black, if that was 0, you want to avoid that. So you want it in shadow, but you don't necessarily want it totally black. But there is, again, one side that's dimmer than the other. Okay, so those directional lights basically block out the overall lighting. You will at some point go back and make adjustments to those lights as you're adding more lights, because you'll find as you add more lights, you might find that the intensity for these lights is too much or too little, so you need to make an adjustment. Okay, so in practice what that means is I'll add another light. I'll add this time a spotlight, and again a spotlight essentially creates a spot or a patch of light depending on which direction it's pointing. So again, in the attributes you've still got intensity, color I suppose if you want, but the spotlight has got additional parameters further down the attribute editor, which is the cone angle. So you can adjust the size of the spot by adjusting the cone angle. You've got penumbra angle, which means that you can adjust the area between light and shadow to make it blurry, and drop off, which sort of reduces the intensity, sort of falls off the intensity. So between those parameters, you can make some sort, gives you a degree of control over what you're getting. Okay, now, a good idea to add additional camera now, because you want to be able to establish the actual composition or the framing of your scene, because really it's what is within the frame that matters in terms of lighting, colors, materials, textures, whatever. Because what's not shown, you don't really need to worry about. So it makes sense to work out the composition first of your scene, then you keep on adjusting the parameters, whether they're lights or materials, until you start getting what you want. So before we move on, I'll just add an additional camera. I've actually got one already, but I'll delete that and show you how I did it. Hit delete. So now the perspective view is a camera in itself. So we're essentially adding a new perspective view when we're adding a new camera. So to add a camera, I'm going to go to Create, Cameras, Camera. As soon as I do that, if I move it out of the way, make it a little bit bigger, you can see the little camera icon. So that camera, incidentally, you can see in the attributes there, is called Camera 1. So if I jump to another view, so there's my perspective view, top, front, whatever. But if I go to Panels Perspective, you can see that additional camera has been added to that list in the perspective camera. So if I go to Camera 1, so now what you see in Camera 1 is what that camera is looking at. So you can see from the outside, so to speak, I can move the camera around. But if I was behind the camera looking through, I'll be seeing the view that's in Camera 1 down here. So you can either make an adjustment outside of the camera, so you've got your normal perspective view to play around with, or you can make it in camera. So one is your play around perspective view. The second one is what you're going to set up as the final composition. So to do that accurately, what you need to do now is go to the render settings and set up your dimensions, your image size. So for this project, it's going to be 1920 by 1080. So you go to your render settings, the common tab. There's two tabs in Maya software setting. You change it to 1920 by 1080 dimensions. So once you've got that, now you need to see exactly what those parameters are. So you go to View, Camera Settings, and you go to Resolution Gate. And then that actually shows you the framing of 1920 by 1080. So now you can more accurately work out your composition based on those dimensions. So I'll just sort of get sort of a certain camera angle that I'm happy with. Okay, so let's just say that. So basically, the more you continue to add detail with lighting, or for that matter, materials and textures, you only really need to be concerned with how it sort of looks within that framing. If it's outside that framing, then you don't have to worry about it. So now, once you've worked out your composition, great, I don't want to sort of touch it. You don't want to accidentally move your camera view, although you still want a perspective view. So what you can do is actually lock your camera that you've added. You select your camera like any object. The channel box, you just left click and drag all the way down so they're highlighted in blue. Right click and go Lock Selected in the drop down menu. Okay, so when you do that, you can see when I select the camera, the handles are grayed out, which means I can't actually move it or do anything. So that's quite useful if you've sort of worked out your composition and you just want to keep it in place.